Thanks, Madam Chair. So it's good to be back for the second half of our budget presentation today. This morning we had emergency management, Homeland Security, and County Attorney's Office. This afternoon we'll kick off with the Sheriff's Office, followed by Emergency Communications, and then we'll talk about the Second Judicial Court functions, Office of Safety and Justice. And then you'll recall that due to a scheduling conflict, we had Dr. Mills and with the Medical Examiner's Office on Tuesday because of her son is getting married as we speak. So
we thought it was nice to let her go to her son's wedding.
Yeah, we thought
she
we'd
did
be
a great job.
reasonable and flexible. So
We're glad we could accommodate that. Okay, the sheriff's budget is on pages 372 to 392. The major changes are on pages 63 and 64. Sheriff Fletcher, welcome.
Madam Chair, thank you. Commissioners, thanks for having us back. I do want to say that we've really enjoyed working with the Chief Financial Officer and their staff for the past 6 months or so, both addressing the concerns regarding this year's budget and trying to chart a course that works for next year as well. We've had some, I think, constructive meetings with County Manager O'Connor, and I think we're in a better place now to try to jointly, figure out how to make all the ends meet. I'm not saying the ends are going to meet this year, but I think next year is a possibility. It clearly, they have recognized some of our shortfalls, structural, financial, what we believe are insufficiencies. We think there might be more. Of course, we requested $2 million more than the budget that's recommended reflects, but we think that we're making progress in meeting in the middle somewhere, maybe closer to Ryan's middle than mine, which is fine. But I say that because I think there's progress and great discussion, and Alex and Kyle have worked closely, and I'm feeling good about where we're at. It may require some reduction both in spending and possibly staff from us. We're going to take a look at the numbers that are here today, and if they're approved by the county board, and figure out what we need to do to bring those points in line with each other. And but obviously, as you look at the budget, you know that our number is relatively high compared to the other departments. We thank you for that. We thank Ryan for that and recognizing that. And I know a lot of that's because Alex has been working closely with the auditor that you hired as well to figure out where some of our shortfalls might be. So if this budget, as recommended by Ryan, is approved, we do not intend to appeal our budget. We think that we can continue to carve out some savings ourselves in certain places to try to make these ends meet. I would say that, we want to reserve the right to come back and make the case mid-year if there's overtime issues or other issues. We still firmly believe that the vacancy factor, whatever the 1.2 or 1.4 or 1.3, is really the figure that we need, and the $700,000 that was added here gets us really halfway to where we think the number should be. But thank you for that. The budget that you have in front of you really is a status quo budget in terms of personnel. There are no people really added. However, at the workshops coming up on the 19th, I think Ryan and John and Scott and others have put together a package which we support that outlines a few extra bodies to do some specific duties as well. But we can talk about that at that point, or you can certainly raise questions here as we go forward. But this budget really is status quo. There are a lot of nuances to it in terms of service fees, et cetera, that Alex is aware of our concern. But I'd like to turn it over to Kyle Meestead for 15 minutes just to go over any major changes or performance measures. The county always likes to have a list of performance measures. And then we'll have plenty of time, I think, for hard questions that might follow. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Madam Chair.
Just one moment. County Manager O'Connor.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And just, Sheriff, 2 other points from this morning to tie into your comments that fit well before Kyle goes into specifics. We have talked some about the September 19th policy discussion here at the board on the public safety funding piece. So hopefully you or your office will be able to be here as a part of it as well, because you're integral to that. And then we also talked about ARPA funding specific to court backlogs and the impact on, and your office is one of the ones that we're working on. And I know there's been conversation going on there, but there's both a this year and a next year piece to that, and that's not reflected here. So we just wanted to raise those 2. We've been talking about them as the day's going on. You can feel confident that we're all tracking the same.
Thank you, and I appreciate you mentioning that. That gives us, some more confidence. Thanks.
Well, and one of the things that I've also mentioned is there are lots of things that happen because this budget is put together early in the year. A lot of things that happen, and so there are addendums that come forward, such as what you were just talking about, that aren't included here, but they are coming. So,
All right.
Okay, Kyle.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you. Major changes going into 2024, 2025. A lot have been discussed with Holly's intro and Scott's as well with respect to internal service fees. So rent, IS, what that looks like, that's documented. With cases of post-traumatic stress and whatnot, we did see a slight uptick in our workers' compensation expenses outside the norm. A significant portion of our levy increase really goes to cover personnel services in light of new labor contracts as approved by the county board. So there was a market adjustment to provide comparable wages with surrounding agencies. That obviously helps with retention, recruitment, very similar to what the county attorney spoke about, but that has helped and continues to make a difference. So thank you for that on the labor front. From our budget hearing with the county manager, as the sheriff touched on too, we did receive some additional funding to help cover inflationary costs around food service and whatnot. That's an issue this year. So those things have been corrected going into 2024 and 2025. The budget also reflects increases in revenue. So historically, we've been more conservative with our revenue estimates to avoid a shortfall at the end of the year. To Susan's, I think Susan or Alex said this too, is more of the budget to actuals model. So we've increased our revenue, and that's revenue from service fees, not fines or fees or those criminal related things that we're going to talk about on September 19th, but more about the security services, civil process, gun permits. So we've corrected those fees, increased those in 2023. They're going to keep rolling forward. I know some departments had fee increases in 2024, 2025. We did that last go around during the supplemental budget process. There's also a lot more detailing of our grants. So in the last year and a half, we've made a really concentrated effort to expand the number of grants that we're bringing in to cover outreach, DWI enforcement, and whatnot. So you'll see in the budget book a lot more detailing and listing of grants that weren't there previously. With respect to the court backlog and those issues in court services, we're also tracking the legislative impact as it relates to expungements for cannabis, for the Clean Slate Act, and then other countywide justice reform efforts such as expungements. So that'll be something that we're flagging, we're monitoring to see what that impact would be going forward. I'll talk real quickly about a couple performance measures, not all of them, but they're listed in the budget packet. With respect to staff who identify as racially or ethnically diverse, we continue to see an uptick every year in that. Again, the ultimate goal is to build a more reflective workforce. The number of leaders who also identify as racially and ethnically diverse continue to increase as well among our ranks, so sergeants, commanders, and so on. A performance measure that I think is probably more unique to us than others is that we also report on percent of staff who identify as female, and that we know females are generally underrepresented in law enforcement and corrections. That's a huge benefit when we have a reflective workforce. Again, we continue to make strides in that area. With respect to the board's priority around intergenerational prosperity and small business spend, you'll see an uptick again in our spending going into 2023 and 2024. 2023 year to date, we're at about a $1.3 million spend, which sounds like a lot, because it is, but ultimately that traces back to some of the capital improvement projects we have with respect to suicide prevention barriers and safety matters in the jail. And so procurement does an excellent job with recruiting and bringing on board emerging small enterprise businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and so on. So we're able to draw upon those collective contracts and make a really positive impact with respect to that goal. And then we also measure the number of emergency papers, so through civil process, harassment restraining orders, orders for protection, whatnot, that are served in a timely manner. Those help to protect victims of crime. We serve those as fast as we possibly can with a relatively high success rate overall. That concludes the performance measures that we indicated in our budget packet, and concludes our initial remarks with respect to major changes and the performance measure piece.
And rest assured, Kyle could talk for an hour on these matters and is knowledgeable enough to go into great detail. I've asked him to, and normally he has an excellent PowerPoint here to show you, but I know the county board asked for no PowerPoints today, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. But I asked Kyle to trim his remarks because I'm sure there are questions, about crime, carjackings, this year's budget, next year's school resource officer issues. So I wanted to just leave as much time as you can to flush all those areas out. But feel free to start with any of the stuff that we've discussed. And I would say I know John Choi talked about it, one of the best performance measures is our violent carjackings have dropped significantly, and our auto thefts here in Ramsey County. And that has been a team effort, between John's office, our office, the African American Leadership Council, just really prevention, intervention, all intertwined into one, and just making a difference in the lives of kids and reducing, the amount of crime. And of course, once the Myth House has come online at some point, we're not directly involved with that. I think that'll be another piece of the puzzle that, helps us treat juveniles in a way that can get them back on the right course. So progress, I'm feeling good about, been 3 or 4 times in my 40-year career where I felt we were making what I would call impact on the problem, and this is one of them. So thank you for your support on those things.
Kyle, I do have one question, because you were talking about the procurement and all these other things, but on page 377, you have the adult detention center daily population for the month of June. Because this was put together before that, so was that June 2022?
It was. There was
2021?
that delay that we always encounter with the performance measures. And I know on September 19th, we're going to unpack a little bit more about bail reform, that nexus around the jail population. Hopefully we can trim these down a bit.
Okay, because this one didn't make any sense to me because it was up and down, and so we can.
Plus
Okay,
for
go
boarding
ahead.
prisoners as well.
Yeah,
COVID.
do you know off the top of your head? So I think the average daily count today, I think I saw was like 301 or 305 at the JDC or at the ADC. Do you know how many you're boarding right now also, if we add them together?
Roughly 100.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we will go to questions, or did Kyle?
No, we're ready for questions.
Okay.
Excellent.
Commissioner Martinson and then McGuire.
Thank you, and thank you, Sheriff. And I'm really happy that you opened with that you are not going to appeal this budget if it's approved. So I appreciate that. I also noticed, unlike other departments that delivered in your section, you've got some things that were proposed that weren't included, listed. And so I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about that a little bit and tell us about the duties and responsibilities of your office for the purpose of setting the budget that you feel like maybe we should be considering.
Well, I'll address 2 of them, and then I'm going to have Kyle go into some detail, because some of them regarding service fees and other matters. But one of them is staffing in the jail. We proposed, I think, 8 additional bodies in the jail, which we think are the most critical. As you know, we're expecting to have our inspection from the Department of Corrections. But after the Stillwater fiasco, I'm wondering if they're really the best agency to inspect us. But we're expecting to have that inspection here in September, pre-inspection, and later in November. And we're hoping to get out from underneath the regulation and restriction that we've been under, and that will reduce the cost to the overall budget next year substantially. But having said that, we still believe that we need some additional bodies in the jail to provide the adequate wellness checks every 30 minutes that are required by DOC. And that is the biggest issue in jails everywhere, is making sure that every inmate is checked on every 30 minutes to make sure they're breathing and something hasn't happened to them while they're in there. So we can get it done with overtime, but that just stresses the employees out and it puts a burden somewhere else in the system. So in our unfunded request, now having said that, Ryan was gracious enough to support a $700,000 increase that we could use for that. We think there's some other needs that are equally as great as that, so it will be a little bit more complex for us to figure out how to pull that together. But our plan is to try to increase staffing in the jail by the beginning of next year to address those wellness checks. How we do that exactly, we haven't decided. Under Sheriff Bill Finney will be retiring next year. We'll have some changes in leadership there, and we might look at some different models as to how we address that particular problem. So that was one. You see a big request there for overtime. I mean, obviously this is an ongoing issue. We hope that we can have a really robust discussion with Ryan and Alex and the auditor that's doing the audit on how all this overtime reacts, because I know there's skepticism by some people about why that overtime exists, and we try to convince others that it only exists because we have to staff those positions, but I don't know that we have, clear agreement on the need for it, and hopefully in the next few months we can get some more agreement on that. So there's a couple other things regarding nuts and bolts. Kyle, why don't you cover those?
You bet. And I think
Before you do that, I think that one of the things that would be really helpful here is, this is not a new question. We go through it every year. I think that we need to have a workshop that's specifically on this issue.
Which issue?
The issue of staffing at the adult detention center and overtime, and because we trying to have that full discussion, truly understand, figure out where we can meet in the middle. It's not just these folks, it's us that are making the decisions on what actually happens there. So I think it's time that we sat down and really worked through it in a workshop. And I assume you would welcome that.
Oh, we would. We'd welcome it. And but I think as a good first step for finance staff in the sheriff's office to have some greater agreement on where the overtime is generated and how it could be addressed. And then before we come to you with information, but we would welcome, and the more information that you're willing to receive about jail staffing, the more we're glad to be here.
County Manager O'Connor?
Madam Chair, thanks. We agree that there is a need for a workshop. There's also a need to be at a spot of commonality in what we're talking about. And we have been making some progress. The implementation of this financial analyst, I believe, she's not technically an auditor, so she reminds me to not call her professionally an auditor. But the person who's been helping us from the outside understand this has been helpful, so we're making some progress. So we can definitely make that request happen, and we'll do it in a way that brings us all together.
Sounds good. Commissioner Martinson, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, quick before Kyle goes on, because it was a question to a statement that you said, Sheriff.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that Ryan gave another $700,000 to help offset, and you said it could go to this, but you think there's something else equally important. What is that something else?
Well, I want to have Kyle talk about. We have a lot of needs, and we haven't decided whether we need to address those needs first or put them into personnel. And I think that's why the flexibility was given there in terms of how we're done. Kyle, why don't you cover where that $700,000 could be spent before you get to the here?
Thank you. So, and I just echo Ryan's point too, there has been a lot of progress made recently, especially, with Angela, the financial consultant, the work with Alex in addressing some of the court backlogs. We did have some rough years there with civil unrest, so our historical averages were off, but I think as we build consensus, it's the spirit of people, partnership, and service delivery. We can work through that piece, but there's also a nexus around just the cost of internal service fees. I mean, that's, our folks can't work from home. We're paying rent like everybody else. I know Holly's contributing and Safety and Justice is to rent. There's a lot of moving pieces there with internal service fees that are a pressure. We're having ongoing conversations with County IS about the IS consolidation. Who was best to provide that service. I have another meeting on Monday with Scott and IS to unpack that piece. There's other pressures around the cost of body cameras, which was recognized by finance. There's the cost of technology. The records management system is a big piece. It just keeps getting more and more expensive. We're coming to an end of our contract in 2024 with Axon, who's the vendor for body cameras, in-car cameras. They're also do tasers and less lethal equipment. We had a meeting this week to look at negotiating a broader, stronger contract under Ramsey County terms and conditions, not the state language, that would allow us to have group the body cameras, the fleet cameras, tasers, less lethal equipment, all in one big package at a reduced rate. So there's good progress made there with that vendor, but I think less than lethal pieces is another component of what we want to expand on. We did put in a request for capital improvement funding for that, as well as some jail security pieces and whatnot, but a lot of needs all the way around. And so we'll do our best to allocate it accordingly, with staffing being one of them. I think ultimately the consensus on overtime and personnel since this document was published and pushed out has been awesome. It's been really good to hear that, hey, we recognize the court backlog, we recognize this, we went through that with civil unrest, that we're, again, that spirit of partnership, I think comes through. So the $700,000, as I understand it, was presented as a unallocated adjustment for us to plug in and have a little bit of discretion of which area we want to spend in.
So if we can find other way to fund these other matters or delay them a year or whatever, we would like to use those dollars for staffing in the jail. We just need to make sure we can cover other costs as well. So Alex is smiling.
Go ahead, and then I'll make a comment here.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I just wanted to add that always my goal and our goal as a team that presents a budget is to present a budget that's sustainable and that we don't have to come back to you in a year to say, hey, unless it's something we couldn't anticipate, right? But the $700,000, they're right, it was unallocated because we felt like to make sure that the sheriff's budget was sustainable after all that we've learned over the past couple of years and where they sit today, that is what they needed to get there, to be sustainable. And for me to feel like as your CFO, I could sit here and say, I think that the sheriff's office, from what I've learned and this time I've spent on it, from our financial consultant, from the controller, from the budget director, that we feel they can live within this budget and it addresses many of the high needs that they've mentioned today, and I appreciate that. Body cameras, food, the contracts, and funding for that. Then they decide what's the biggest priority within the budget to make it work.
And that's obviously a good way to lay this out, but what I hope happens, I mean, you kind of led with the needing this money in the jail for staffing, and I hope that we don't come back and we're telling you that if that is your highest priority, then that's what you should use it for. And so coming back and saying, well, we told you it was a high priority, but we needed these other things, it is a budget that you have to work within. And I think I heard you say that yourself. So I'm just, it made me a little uncomfortable to hear, oh, we have all this problem with staffing, but maybe we want to use it someplace else. It's not consistent to me.
No, I think that's a fair observation from where you're sitting. I just would remind you that we requested $3 million to cover both the staffing and the other items that Kyle was talking about, and we eventually worked it down to $700,000 that could be used in a flexible manner to address the issue. So I think we're going to get to where you want to get to.
Well, and with all due respect, that's maybe what you asked for, but you're still getting the highest increase of any department.
I think I noted
And
that.
it's huge. And so not everybody, even in my own personal life, I don't get everything I want,
Yeah.
but I hopefully get what I need.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is it's a sustainable budget, and that's what we expect to come out of this. One of the things that you mentioned was IS, and we had IS, when was that? This week has kind of gone into a blur for me. But we had the overall service teams and talking about, it wasn't IS, but we were talking about the fact that we're trying to do things like with HR and with IS, where we have some in fleet management, all of those different things. They're very different things, but trying to make sure that we're a large enough organization that we're doing those on a county-wide level, not individual departments. And so I appreciate the fact that there's a recognition of that, and that I mean, it does take some time to figure out how do you do that, but we do need to, that's going to be really critical from a taxpayer standpoint and from a security standpoint.
Madam
So-
Chair, just on that might be worth a workshop of itself, the IS portion. And if we were invited, our concern is we have one of the few 24-hour operations that requires IS services. We can't afford to be down for 2 hours
No.
and wait till the next day. And so that is one of our concerns, losing those IS personnel from our department and losing access to those services. So just be aware we have concerns about our operation being impacted by the loss of them.
I can understand that, but we do have a lot of other 24-hour, I mean, we are a 24-hour operation, no matter how you look at it. And so I don't know that it's all that different, but we have made that decision as a board, the policy decision as a board, that that's where we're going. So we'll work through it. Scott?
Madam Chair, Kyle mentioned it a little earlier. We'd have ongoing meetings with the IS director on that. So the next
Yes.
one is on Monday. So we're still working through that on the staff level.
And that's what I understood. And I appreciate the fact that is, those conversations are taking place, and we'll get there. Oh, man, I lost place. Last week, Commissioner McGuire and then Commissioner Fretham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sheriff. It's good to see you. And I'm grateful that we're trying to work this all out. As you can appreciate, as a board, we're responsible for a budget and to our taxpayers. And so it's difficult to have certain parts of our budget come back that need more money, and we don't, it hasn't been allocated. So we really hope that we can reach a budget that we can all that we can trust will be followed. Every department that's come up to us has had other needs. I mean, everyone's work is important in this county, and they all come and say, hey, we're having trouble with IS, we're having trouble with the different, things that we've decided to spread around. And so everybody's really trying to do their best, and we appreciate that you're going to work with us as our team members to get this all to happen. I would say, I know that that the jail is important. The work that you do is really important. I would say our 911 service is a 24-hour service, very important. Our emergency management, we just heard from them. They're all going to work within their budget. They're going to present a budget that we can live with, and they're all going to work within it. So I'm hoping that we can, trust that you will do the same. And I know that we all care about the same residents, and we all care about the same work. So I appreciate that you're going to work on that. I do have a question on your performance measures, just so you could clarify with me. And we touched about it a little bit, that you're boarding 100 people. And I think it goes to number 5 on page 377, the Adult Detention Center daily population fee. And I'm wondering, as I'm seeing these headlines, that are these measures that you're trying to get to, or is this just what you're estimating? When I think of a performance measure, I think of it something that we're looking forward to doing. So are we trying to get to 415 more? I'm always thinking we're trying to reduce the number of people that we have in adult detention, that that's the work that we're doing, is that we really want to do all the early work so that we have less people in detention.
And
So,
Commissioner McGuire,
yeah, so
that
help
is
me
actually the
understand.
question that
Yeah.
we brought up to begin with, and this is not, well, we can get more information on it,
Okay.
but this particular line was confusing to me as well.
Okay.
And
What did we decide about it?
that we were going to learn more about it.
Okay, so we didn't get the answer. Okay.
Well, let me just.
So no wonder I'm re-asking it. I didn't get the
Well-
answer. Okay.
First of all, the book
great.
itself might be,
Thanks.
Commissioner, the book itself might have some numbers, as we mentioned earlier, from previous years. But, our goal is always to reduce our population. So, obviously, significant crime increases of the last 2 years caused a problem. We're seeing some crime decreases now that might help us toward that end. But those numbers are a little confusing unless you break them into the ones we're housing at the 80 Adult Detention Center versus the ones that we're boarding. And DOC has required us to stay, it depends which figure you use, 320 to 360, but they really want us under the 320. That's why we're at the 301. Now, I think for surge capacity, we could probably argue that on 3-day weekends and a Tuesday after weekend, we could probably violate that slightly. But they want us to move those individuals out of there quickly. So in terms of what our performance would be, to continue to work on bail reform, continue to work on release protocols from the judges so that our population stays at a manageable number, in part because it's a tough environment for everybody. We do not want to happen what in our jail what happened at Stillwater, that because of short staffing and lack of letting prisoners out of their cells during the day, you actually have a riot or a protest that occurs in there. And we're proud of the environment that we have in our jail, but it all hinges on low population, adequate staff in order to make sure that takes place. And Kyle can talk more about the numbers.
And Kyle, I think you should, if you could go to page 377, because I think, quite frankly, that this number 5 is just messed up.
This also dates back to, I'll date myself here, is when we had the critical success indicators way back when, we always reported on the daily population, and I think the conversation over the years has been to get more percentage-based. A percent reduction in the population would probably be a better measure. We had the reduction during COVID, but then the court backlog created an uptick. So there is, well, I think at a workshop we can probably unpack this, because
Yes.
above and beyond the average daily population, there's the average length of stay, there's different metrics that's used. And I think unpacking that with the scheduling, the overtime would be a really good conversation to get consensus on this. But this measure here dates back to when we had the 7 or 8 really lengthy performance measures back when, yeah.
Yeah, so I just honestly think that this is not what it was meant to be, because it does appear that we're saying, hey, can we get more people? That's
Yeah.
success.
No,
And that's
well,
not what
That's not what-
this is about.
Like maybe a percent reduction over time or something, and I know
Something, but
September 19th.
right now, it looks like you're trying to get more people in.
Right. And I just wanted to ask that question one more time, Madam Chair, if you already asked that. If I could just ask one more question, and I know we're going to dig deeper into this in a workshop, which I'm grateful for. Can you just talk about boarding prisoners? So we're taking, so we have extra capacity so that we're boarding
No.
other people's? Okay.
The opposite.
Other way around? Okay. Oh, we're paying to board them
We're paying
somewhere
to
else.
board them
Yeah.
somewhere else because of the current DOC order
Yeah,
the sheriff
okay,
spoke about,
so
which
we're boarding
there's
them.
a piece coming up here soon at which we're gonna have
We're-
what do you call it? It's a visit from the, I don't know what the name of the formal
Inspection.
visit is. Inspection.
Thank you. I was reading it differently, that we were housing them. We're sending them away. I am aware that we're doing that. Okay. Thank you.
And
And that's, all
Just
right.
as a follow-up to that, so the inspection is about the numbers of people there, but there were also issues about the public health the connection with public health nurses and stuff, that's not part of the inspection, is it?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, what I would say is the inspection is a follow-up to last year's or earlier this year's inspection that happened in February or whatever. The outcome of the previous time was a change in our licensure on the population side. So this ends up being a numbers question here in September, but it's not about just numbers in the conversation as a follow-up. It's the bed checks, it's the whole,
Okay,
it's looking at
that's what
licensure
bed
on a
checks.
broader scale.
Yes. Okay.
I think I can answer that if you want me to.
I think he just did.
Okay, very good. I'd rather not answer it anyhow, but I could if you needed to.
No, I mean, obviously, that's a part of the jail, and so I'm glad that that is part of it, and I was just trying to put it together. I have all kinds of hands up here.
Thank you.
And,
No point.
okay, Commissioner Ortega.
When we have that workshop, maybe we need to look at these measures. Maybe they're not appropriate in general.
Yes.
Just look at the measures.
Good idea. Commissioner Fretham. I wasn't sure if yours was on this point, but go ahead, Commissioner
Awesome,
Fretham.
thank you. So first, I just want to clarify, because I think we've said it a few times, but just for the record, this proposed budget is less than what you asked for. So when you talk about reductions, it's reductions in what you asked for, but it is 13.1% higher than last year. And then if we, and forgive me, I was a theater major, but 2.95 million, I calculate, if you had gotten that, it would be a 19.33% increase. I'm looking at the finance people who are supposed to be good at math.
Just a one-time increase, just a one-time increase. though.
Perfect, okay, so we did not go with a 19+% increase, we went with 13, which is still the highest.
Just a one-time.
The highest.
Cool. Just clarifying that for the record. And then I just want to, I see the workers' compensation claims. So the insurance costs also increased. Are you talking about like just our contribution for medical insurance, or is this like insuring your officers or?
Well, I'm going to have Kyle address it. It's been a lengthy discussion about some of our liability. Go ahead, Kyle.
There's two tiers of insurance increases. So as part of the budget process, the county's rate for health insurance went up to like 18.25% from whatever. There's a health insurance cost increase, but there's also an increase to our contribution to the tort fund for liability, property damage, those sorts of pieces. So there was an uptick there.
Great. Okay, so then my question related to that, I'm going to tie it to the workers' compensation. I know I've asked in the past just for a workshop on how we're supporting our deputies, knowing how just challenging and dangerous their job is, and wanting to make sure that we are being proactive and making sure they're getting the supports that they need to be successful and to, hopefully prevent the secondary and participatory trauma that they might experience in their work. That could help reduce some of our PTSD, but I guess I would also tie that to how can we also look at what you're doing to reduce potential liability and reduce those insurance costs, or the policies that you could be implementing. I would be interested in.
So Madam Chair, Commissioner, to September 19th, with the public safety, I know it's secretive a little bit to some extent, but Scott and I have been going back and forth on a couple slides with respect to employee assistance, the work that we do in that area with some contracted vendors, how an appropriation could be spent to expand that, because there's no doubt that throughout a first responder's career, police, fire, deputy, military, I would group in there too, is you in the course of a single shift could sometimes see more trauma than most people experience in a lifetime, and how do you process that? So September 19th, we're going to unpack a little bit of that.
Well, let me just say that I think we've made progress in that area, in part thanks to you as the county board. I know Commissioner Martinson was concerned and worked with the union on a lot of those health and wellness issues that she had experience with. Ryan was very supportive of progress that we made there. And part of that is on the 19th, part of that wellness piece that Ryan has inserted in there will be helpful as well. I do want to thank you again for addressing the salary issue, because the salary issue has been huge in terms of the morale of the troops, but also in terms of us being able to hire and keeping competent staff. We don't have a problem hiring deputies to come to work at the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, which is a great thing, because That's a morale booster. The jail issue is a slightly different issue. We've been working on a lot of heavy lifting around that issue with the staffing. But in terms of recruiting people to work as deputies, in large part because of the things that you've done and the sheriff's office have done, I think we made a lot of progress there. And hopefully we'll continue to make more with that allocation on the wellness side.
Excellent. Well, thank you. No, I'm glad we were able to do that. I know we had gotten or applied for some grant funding for that. One of the questions I had with the grant funds and finding more services, will the new sort of grant position that we're hiring Ramsey Countywide also be working with our elected offices?
Commissioner Fredham, I'm glad you went there. So we're bringing, this budget includes a position that's being added on the front end on on the prevention side, a risk officer, and so, or safety, excuse me. And so in some of what you're describing, we're bringing in a resource the county's never had. And our hope would be that we would work very closely with your office for a variety of reasons, but one of them is there's a lot of different settings that incur a lot of risk, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, I was thinking that, and also just the grant person that's supposed to be reaching out.
Sorry, I had a different spot.
Thank you for answering that question I hadn't asked yet, but also the grant one.
That was not my best, but we'll do better after lunch going forward. Safety officer, check to your question you haven't asked. If the tape can be spliced and re-put together, that'll be great.
Let me know if you need to just ask it.
Yes,
So you
for the
can put
grant
that in
positions,
there.
for sure. I would actually say our elected offices are better at chasing non-levy revenue through the other sorts of state and federal opportunities than much of our organization. And it is through learning from those offices, their success in those spaces, that we are trying to now bring more of that heft to the rest of the organization. But that being said, anyone who wants to be a part of grant applications and working together, that's important. We've been successful on some recent grants through Congresswoman McCollum's office, specifically on some of these initiatives that cut across the sheriff's office, county attorney's office, et cetera, because they're collaborative. And so I definitely see a world in which we do that, and then we'll work to develop who's the lead on writing the grant, but we'll pull everyone together.
Excellent. Last question, and this one, you don't have to answer now because you're just here, so I have an opportunity to ask it. But one of the things we raised in our county courts meeting, our last county courts meeting, was implementation of new red flag laws and the importance of a robust and coordinated effort between our courts and counties and our sheriff's offices. And I'm just wondering if you've started looking at those new laws, working with our court system at all on that.
It's a great question. You know, we, of course, supported the red flag law. We haven't had any complaints yet brought to us, you know, that a relative or someone, a law enforcement could initiate that. But it's on our to-do list to get it done. So thank you for reminding us.
No, and thank you for supporting that and being proactive. You know, the incident that happened in Roseville, but it was in my neighborhood because I'm on the south side of Shoreview, where the officer in Roseville was shot, and I know we had Ramsey County responding to that, and I think for the safety of the community and your officers, this is a really important law, and the person who did that could have possibly been prevented had we had that in place.
Well, just briefly, you see it as well. We see it every day. The mental health issues that are in our community are expanding. I don't want to say exploding, but they are expanding rapidly. And the calls that are generated because of forms of mental health, it used to just be chemical addiction, but we're seeing straightforward mental health. Granted, many people would do better if they had services where they had the proper medication and they're outside of that service window. But yes, we're concerned about guns in the hands of people that have mental illness. It's a growing issue.
Thank you. Those were all my questions.
Commissioner Martinson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just touch base briefly on some of the revenue stuff coming in. I know one of your revenue is doing patrol to our contract cities, but we're no longer going to be contracting with Falcon Heights, is my understanding. So that should be a revenue reduction of $1.5 million, I think. How are we making that up, or where are we making that up, and is that addressed in this budget?
Well, we're going to have to cut bodies. We're going to have to cut bodies. So here's the overall plan. Okay. And it's good that you brought it up because you represent that area. We provide contract services to the city of Falcon Heights we've jointly agreed that that's not the best relationship. On our end, it's because it's not contiguous with our other services. They may have some other reasons to look at other options. So we've agreed to sever that relationship at the end of the year. They have begun a process to try to find an alternative. I recommend Roseville as their alternative. It's, you know, a contiguous group. They have enough officers on the street they could cover that. And secondly, St. Paul would be a second option. They probably would see less patrol work from St. Paul because they're always drawn down into the busier areas. So they're looking at that option, and they're also looking at creating their own police department, which they haven't realized yet is going to be impossible to do with the few officers that are available out in this industry. But they'll come to that conclusion here in the next 30 days. I doubt they would want to go back to St. Anthony, you know, because of the Philando Castile shooting, but that's still another option for them. So we'll see where that goes, but our tentative budget plan is to cut, they have 6 bodies essentially that are dedicated to Falcon Heights. The other contract cities have agreed to pay for and absorb 2 of those. So that means we will have to reduce our complement by 4 on January 1st. And so really we're into, as soon as we hire this young Corinne deputy that we got a grant for, we're planning to go into a hiring freeze for some time until we've resolved that issue. We have to resolve the school resource issue as well. So just so you know what our thinking is, we have to reduce our complement by not hiring, going into a hiring freeze. And, you know, it's even possible we would push some deputies back into the jail short term because we're a little short there. So what happens January 1st to Falcon Heights? That's the interesting one. There is a provision in our contract with them that we would continue to provide service until they inked an agreement with someone else. Now, that doesn't, it isn't supposed to be long-term. It's supposed to be pending a transitional period. So our plan is we're budgeting for next year without them as a service, but we are going to charge them $100 an hour, our standard fee, for our deputies working overtime in Falcon Heights. So rather than making sure we hire bodies. So bottom line is we're going to continue to do service while they figure it out, but we're going to charge them the overtime rate to continue to do that service, which will hopefully help them move the ball and make a decision. But thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. Can I just follow up with another
ahead.
question? So
Yes.
in your response, I hear that you're also implementing some controls already this year, probably to help us get to the year-end budget with a hiring freeze or other issues. What other, management leadership things have you implemented to work within this current biennium budget, so that as we're looking forward, we have trust and confidence that you'll work within that budget?
Maybe I can't point a finger to enough of them, but we're clearly reducing spending in other areas. Our biggest overage is in overtime, and when we have the workshop, I think hopefully I can convince you that it's necessary. The backlog in courts that you talked about in terms of we have 50 murderers in our jail that are going to trial and need to go to trial. So maybe not enough. Alex would say, or at least we're not spending credit, our P-card expenses are down, right? We are spending less, and I assure you for the last quarter, we're going to spend nearly nothing. But it's a major operation to run a sheriff's department, and we're going to delay expenses the best that we can. But staffing, overtime, finding ways to not have to pay overtime is really the most critical need. And as of yet, just because of the backlog in courts, our hospital overtime dollars, you realize that it all ties together. The public health issue we had earlier this year about sending people to the hospital, which you were concerned about, and that's fine, we've resolved it. We're sending everyone to the hospital for an evaluation, but the cost of securing inmates at the hospital in that environment is enormous. So, and then bringing them back after they've cleared. So probably that workshop should include not just the jail, but the hospital security unit as well, to talk about how that works, so.
Excellent. Well, and I guess I'd like to make a comment on that. The cost of a life is worth a whole lot more than what we have to do to make sure that they're safe, especially when we've got the public health nurses there talking about what needs to be done. I do have a question. I mean, you said that with Falcon Heights that you won't leave them in a lurch. There's a part of the contract that says that. You mentioned the school resource officers.
Yep.
What are you doing you just pulled them, is my understanding.
Well,
Correct?
the definition of pull is probably needs.
Are they being served?
Yes.
By who?
Same people that were serving them before. Maybe I could go on in a longer explanation. It would be.
Well, I thought I heard that you had pulled the.
I canceled the contracts.
But they're still there.
They're still there.
Okay.
More than glad to give a longer explanation. If you followed the law change, you know that there was a piece of legislation that no one saw, and certainly law enforcement was not involved with at all at the Capitol, that established new restrictions on what type of force and restraint officers could use or deputies could use if they were agents of the school. Now, strange as it might sound, if an officer or deputy is an agent of the school, and that's been defined now by either having a contract or being paid for by the school, that there are less tools that deputy or officer can use than if they were an officer on the street responding to a school-related problem. So they've established a two-tiered system in this law as to who can do what. And so this is why a majority of law enforcement agencies that have school resource officers are withdrawing their contracts. And I'm not saying it's everyone, but it's a clear majority of departments, in hopes that the governor will address this through a special session. The governor has agreed that it's a problem, needs to be addressed, but he's looking for consensus of both the House and the Senate leaders before he calls a special session. So the law establishes criminal penalties and increased civil penalties for individuals and agencies whose officers might use force that is no longer allowed. So, what's the best solution? Well, the best solution is to not overreact, don't panic, try to get it fixed, and keep our school resource officers in the school, but not under the school resource agent concept. And so what we've done is we've reorganized our school resource officers into a new unit called the juvenile unit. And as the juvenile unit, they are handling missing persons and juvenile investigations, as well as being the liaison to the schools. So we haven't left our schools abandoned. We've told them that we're going to be there, but not in the capacity as a school agent. And unfortunately for us, it means in the short term, we don't receive revenue from the schools. And so feel free to weigh in on your perspective as to how that should work. But we're hoping in the next week the governor will take some action to address this, and we'll be back to where we need to be. If the governor doesn't call a special session and this law isn't fixed, my recommendation to the schools that we serve is that they seek and find private security to perform their security needs in the next 2 months. And we would maintain a presence there for the next 30 to 60 days while they find that private security, which is what St. Paul and Minneapolis have done. Now, having said that, if that's the way this tumbles out, of course, then we have a financial hole that needs to be addressed similar to the Falcon Heights. Now, having said that, in February, I'm confident a majority of the Minnesota legislature is going to change this law back to what it was. Everybody agrees that the only question is there a consensus to hold a special session? And if you know how a special session works, once the governor opens it, closing it is a problem unless there is a complete agreement. Because to go to change law, you have to go through the committees, even in the special session, unless you suspend the rules, which suspending the rules requires a 2/3 vote of each house to suspend the constitutional rules regarding there. So these are the problems the governor's dealing with, and this afternoon he's leaving for Japan on a trade mission. So I don't know where we're going to be next week. I can tell you there's a lot of people discussing this.
Well, and you made a statement that there was agreement on this and everybody agrees that it needs to be fixed, and I don't think that that's necessarily the case because I'm reading what's in the newspaper as well as everybody else. I'm not a legislator, so I'm not, I don't have all the ins and outs of that particular law.
Right.
That might be something, if there is some way that we could get more information. I don't know that it doesn't need a workshop, but I would like to get more information on what that law is and why. I mean, there's a reason that the legislators put it in place. And I don't want to quote things from the paper that may be overstating what it is, but that it wasn't something that was done without a lot of thought, but maybe there needs to be changes to it. But I don't know that going back to what it was before because I don't know all of those ins and outs.
Well, Madam Chair, I can tell you it was done without any input from law enforcement. Law enforcement knew nothing about what was in that bill. Nothing.
I don't know. I mean,
it was in the education bill, and we weren't invited to any of the discussions. So,
well, we're not invited to some of the discussions, and if it affects us, we do something about it. All I want is to get some basic information on what it is, and what I don't exactly understand how changing the title of what the officer is doing in the schools. Does that mean they don't have to abide by this law and they could do these things? I don't know. Anyhow, I'm sorry. I went down a rabbit hole there, and I apologize for that because I don't understand it, and I think
a worthwhile rabbit hole to investigate. So,
well, as far as the budget, I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Fretham.
Well, the added language extends protections to all children that were existing for children with disabilities. So it prohibits employees or agents of a district, which includes school resource officers, security personnel, or police officers contracted with a district, shall not inflict any form of physical holding that restricts or impairs a pupil's ability to breathe, restricts or impairs a pupil's ability to communicate distress, places pressure or weight on a pupil's head, throat, neck, chest, lungs, sternum, diaphragm, back, or abdomen, or results in straddling a pupil's torso. This change is still subject to reasonable force standards, which means that in an incident, those moves could still be done when it is necessary under the circumstances to correct or restrain a student to prevent imminent bodily harm or death to the student or to another. And I guess I'm just wondering, when do SROs take these actions in schools when it's not to prevent imminent bodily harm or death to the student or another?
Well, from the list you read, they never do, and I can tell you that nearly all of those items are forbidden by other post rules or other laws that are there. But the one term you didn't mention was simple prone restraint. And our officers nearly always prone restraint an uncooperative person that's resisting arrest. Prone restraint has nothing to do with obstructing airways. It has nothing to do with controlling breathing. It has to do with the safest way to handcuff an individual who's out of control, search them, and then roll them over and then sit them on their butt. It's a 30-second process. But the law prohibits our deputies from using prone restraint, which, by the way, as you might imagine, in my 40 years, I've made hundreds, I don't know how many hundreds of arrests. Anytime a person is uncooperative or refuses to submit to our instructions when he's being arrested, that person is placed on the ground in a prone restraint. It's a standard operating procedure for law enforcement officers throughout the country and throughout the state of Minnesota. It has nothing to do with putting their knee on the neck like Derek Chauvin did. That's murder. All right, we don't restrict. We try to get a person back to a hold position as quickly as possible. But those other items there, no, we're not using them.
Okay. I do want to get back to the budget, which is where we were started from, and the concern that I had that somehow our schools were not being protected, and that's, and you're not getting the revenue for that, so that does have an impact on the budget. But now we're going to go way back to the actual budget. And
Okay.
I have Commissioner Martinson and then Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you. I'm going to get us back to the budget, and we're getting there. And by the way, I just want to acknowledge this is the best budget conversation that we have had in my whole time here. So thank you. This feels really cooperative, and
You
I
know why?
appreciate it.
We got rid of those PowerPoints.
See, that's amazing. Well, then noted, there will be no PowerPoints when we have a budget conversation. But I just want to go back to, so you have said this a couple times, so I just want to make sure that we're clear, is in the reduction of, a contract with Falcon Heights, in the potential reduction of revenue on SROs, you've used the term, we're going to have to cut bodies. And so I want to make sure that we understand what that means, and that
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that doesn't mean you're laying deputies off, but that you are going to use the vacancy factor. And we know that we have people coming up for retirement in months, that it would just be not a backfill, and that we're not actually
Right.
laying people off. But I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, our plan is not to lay off.
Okay.
Well, obviously, little depends on what happens with the officers, but I'm confident, I am very confident by February, we're going to get back to the SRO point that we were before. But we only have 4 to absorb from Falcon Heights because the contract cities are taking 2. Through retirements and attrition, we can probably manage that, but I do want to make sure we bring on our first Corinne deputy that's part of there, and then after that, there'll be essentially a hiring freeze until we sort out all these other matters come February. I'm not ruling out the possibility that we don't look for positions that aren't as fruitful, maybe some civilian positions. I don't want to do that, but if we have some vacant civilian positions, we maybe eliminate them, from our complement so we can reduce our overall spending. I know Alex is excited, Scott was excited about the possibility of reducing some positions. We're going to try to do that if necessary to make the ends meet.
Thank you. That sounds like a really great way to get us to that point without doing any layoffs and taking care of people. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner McGuire and then Commissioner Rand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a school resource officer question, but I won't ask it because I know you want to move on from that. But I'll ask it afterwards. But just curious if we have school resource officers everywhere in all the schools, or if they have their own. Anyway.
I think you just asked it.
I did ask it. That's the one I wanted to ask. But can you just explain to me in this budget, is there specific areas where the contract cities budgets are, or is that all merged in with all of this?
No, there's a
So,
specific,
I'm just looking to see if there's
Alex
somewhere.
could probably, or Polly?
Go ahead.
I'm just more than happy to speak to this. If you look on some of your pages, I will grab a
Can you move your microphone in front of, and turn it on, that's good too.
Yeah, if you just
There you
point,
go.
if you
It's
just
on.
point it out to
Okay.
me. If you
One
just,
of the lights not going, it's Friday afternoon, I apologize.
Yeah,
Commissioner McGuire, I can answer that for you. Yes, it is broken out because of the contract cities and those services, it is a separate fund because it is an enterprise fund. And so that is located, when you look under the title as law enforcement services, that would be your contracted cities.
Page 387,
oh, okay, so that's called law.
when you look under divisions on
I
387,
see.
you can see the revenue for law enforcement services on that
Oh,
page.
okay, so that's the contract city services.
And then
Yes.
page 389, same thing for the expenditure side. And because this budget is balanced, the expenditures match the revenue.
Yes.
Right.
And the contract cities then, that is for patrol, which is not what the sheriff's office does.
It's above and beyond the sheriff.
Pardon me?
Above and beyond our patrol functions in water patrol, we have a
Oh, yeah,
significant water
that's true.
patrol function that we're involved with.
But basically, the contract is because you are their police department that does the patrol and all the things that the police department, city police department does in those cities.
Yes.
And it's fully covered. Commissioner Fretham.
So for the expenditures, is there like a portion of some of the operational administrative fees attributed to that as well, so that, those officers and the percentage of, HR services, NIS services?
Me too. Madam Chair, Commissioner, so when we do the contract cities budget, there's an administrative overhead fee that's assessed by the sheriff's office that covers some of the finance staff, the training, those pieces. In 2024, there is also an indirect cost allocation that's assessed to the contract communities. It's 145,000. We negotiated-ish, is maybe higher. It's somewhere around there. Contract cities have also historically paid, for car insurance and those moving pieces as well to the tort fund. There's ongoing conversations with finance risk management on that front as well. So they pay a portion to us to offset training, some supplies, some of the administrative supervision management. That is a huge savings for them because they contract with us versus having their own finance and HR and IT functions. And then there's a portion that's paid back to offset the indirect cost allocation, which I think is county manager's office, human resources.
Bottom line is we try to make the county whole.
Yeah. They pay.
That's what I was getting for. I
They
just
also
wanna make
pay rent,
sure that
yeah.
all of those, especially because, you pointed out, those costs go up for you. They've gone up for pretty much all of our departments, and making sure that our I represent the vast majority of the contract cities. I don't want them to be, overcharged, but I also represent some non-contract cities, and I don't want them having to pay for law
It's been a
enforcement
delicate dance
cities.
for 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I think, and I do have Commissioner Moran next, but it was on this issue. Do you provide these services, for example, in the city of St. Paul, patrol services, and they don't get charged for it? Similar services to what you would do to the contract cities?
Well, the real succinct answer to that is no, we don't provide patrol services.
Okay.
However, we do have grants, as you know, let me back up. Our water patrol services are provided throughout the county, including St. Paul, Crosby, Harriet Island, the river, et cetera. So we have some water patrol, park patrol people as well that patrol our parks, waterways, and to keep them safe, usually county facilities and county parks. But we have some grants, as you know, and I'm sure John talked about it, the auto theft grant that, let's just face it, most of the stolen cars are in St. Paul. So we're spending a fair amount of time in St. Paul with those grant bodies to address that issue.
And let's be clear, the suburbs are paying the same property taxes as far as the sheriff's department and the non-patrol things. So the police presence is what they have to pay for separately. And so that's what I was trying to get to.
Very good point.
So, Commissioner Moran, do you want to speak to that too?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Fretham, I think that's a really good question. I just wanted to add from the indirect cost allocation, so Budget Director Earl and Deputy Director Vogt, we're reviewing the indirect cost allocation. So we do that as part of the budget. That's how you charge out things like the county manager's office, like finance. It's often HR is often charged based on how many FTEs do you have? What is your budget? We were not charging the contract cities for that previously. When we discovered that, we decided we needed to charge the contract cities, to your point, along with some other areas, internal facing areas. And so we adjusted that, but it's going to be over time, right? Asking a smaller jurisdiction like a contract city to raise their levy by 10% to pay for that is a lot. So we're in conversation. We have a work group going, Deputy County Manager Williams and I and the Sheriff's Office, Kyle, and the contract cities are working through that. So this year that is the right one, but I want to say that because this will continue to change over time as we look at our indirect cost allocation and how we charge all the different areas that we do work for.
Okay, you've been very patient, Commissioner Moran.
That's only because I'm really good at listening and learning, which I have sat here and been able to learn a lot. And I think one of the biggest point that I have learned is that the county board, county manager, and the sheriff's office came together to sit down and listen to each other. Maybe you learn something from each other in a way that the work that you're doing to keep the public safe without going over budget can be a priority. right? Because I think we all can agree that the work you do is about safety, you're right? But I also heard you talk a little bit about prevention and intervention too. And that's good. I mean, all the commissioners have brought some really good points forward. But the biggest point to me is that there seems to be some compromising that is happening here. And I think that was needed to happen because, you know, as I look at the county and all of the great work that we do, and then I am learning that we do, is that, you know, finding and seeing your department go so much over budget either takes away from other entities or creates a levy for the people back in these communities, right, which both is not so good. So I'm really happy to hear that there's more work to do, there's more to do, but to do together, and I look forward to the workshop and that's happening. I heard you a couple of times mentioning the IS services, and I'm not too sure how losing the IS services, what that means. IS is technical pieces like that, right? And so, and you also mentioned like the emergency services or keeping folks who come into the jail safe and looking at the safety and well-being. But there's also go for the officers being safe too and their well-being. So it's a back and forth for both of them. So I'm thinking, you know, as you look at the 13% increase you've gotten, and hopefully a lot of that will go towards staffing, so that the need for the overtime that is a higher cost than just getting someone to do the regular duty will be minimized. But also looking at what those partnerships looks like. You know, the partnership that you have with County Attorney Choi, right? The partnerships that that you can have with, you know, emergency services. And so who captures those costs, or who's able to, you know, backfill in a way that doesn't put the burden on you to do it all. And I think sometimes when we look at our work, we look at how we're going to do it, but not the partnerships that we can create to spread those costs across many different entities. I want to thank you for the work that you and that I hear that you're doing within the community. You named the prevention and intervention work. I talked about the auto theft that meeting that I was going to attend yesterday. When I got there, I realized I had another meeting. But that's a lot of the work that you're doing with the African American Leadership Council and African American men to really support African American young boys and girls and their families, right? To help temper the crime that we see. Because what we do know is that law enforcement can't do all this. 100%. And to do it in a way that is helpful for community or with community. So it's good to see that partnership. So I wanted to just raise that up for you. And I just look forward to the continual partnership that hopefully the county can have with you and your department to work to ensure that the concerns of the jail is taken, with staffing in the jail is taken care of. The safety and well-being of the folks who come into those jails is a priority, and the priority of those who are staffing them is a priority. And in a way that we can do this together so that we can stay on budget and make sure that we're taking care of all the areas that needs to be taken care of within a budget that we put forth here at Ramsey County. So I appreciate you showing up. I appreciate these good conversations, because what I'm hearing has not always been that way. And so that is great strides within itself. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, Cal. I appreciate you spending time sitting down with me and helping me to better understand the work of the Sheriff's Office. And I think when we do that a little bit more, when we listen to the needs of the sheriff, but you also listen to the needs of the county and our priorities, we can move forward a little bit better. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments.
This, I think that, are there any other questions or comments? I would also like to second that as far as the working together and trying to figure out how we can make sure that we are meeting the needs And also, obviously, the transparency to all of our constituents. And so I appreciate it and look forward to the workshop that we're going to have. We'll learn more there and address some of the issues that you and I were questioning, just to try to figure out how all of this fits together. So,
Just in closing, I just
sure.
have one comment. You know, Raphael's been sitting here for 29 years in that same chair during the budget hearing, and I'm troubled by the fact that I have aged a lot more than him. in those 29 years.
Well, we have
I
our
wanna know
theories
why
about
that
that.
is. I want to know why that is.
Yes. I think at that point, we're going to take a break now. Thank you.